The morning water was warm against Krelvan's skin as he floated in the bathing pool. He watched the light from Veltara's sun dance across the ceiling of his home, creating patterns that shifted and moved like living things. Outside, he could hear the sound of the city waking up. The gentle hum of transport pods moving through the air, the distant calls of waterbirds near the coast. "You're thinking too much again," Hannah said from the doorway. She smiled at him, her silver eyes bright in the morning light. "The water will get cold if you stay in there all day." Krelvan laughed and pulled himself from the pool. Hannah handed him a drying cloth, and he pressed his forehead against hers in the traditional greeting between bonded mates. They had been together for 15 cycles now, and he still felt grateful every morning when he woke beside her. Their 2 children were already awake, playing in the common room. The youngest, barely 3 cycles old, was trying to stack building blocks higher than his head. The elder child was reading from a data pad, her face serious with concentration. She wanted to be a historian when she grew up, just like Elder Day. "Good morning, little ones," Krelvan said. Both children looked up and ran to him, wrapping their small arms around his legs. He lifted them both, one in each arm, and they squealed with delight. "Father, can we go to the tide pools today?" his daughter asked. "I want to see if the new coral samples have grown." "Maybe this evening," Krelvan said. "First, Father has to go to work." The Tidal Institute stood at the edge of the city, where the buildings met the ocean. Krelvan had worked there for 10 cycles, studying exotic matter and energy fields. The work was peaceful and slow, the way all Sharevan preferred their lives. There was no rush, no pressure. Just the steady accumulation of knowledge, one discovery building upon another. His colleague Minho was already in the laboratory when Krelvan arrived. Minho was younger, full of enthusiasm for every small breakthrough. He waved excitedly as Krelvan entered. "Look at this," Minho said, pointing to a display screen. "The resonance patterns have stabilized. We might actually understand how to channel exotic particles by the end of the year." Krelvan studied the data. It was impressive work. "This is good. Elder Dai will be pleased." "Speaking of Elder Day," Minho said, his voice dropping lower. "Have you heard the news from the council?" Krelvan shook his head. He didn't pay much attention to council business. Politics had never interested him. "There's a new species making contact with systems near ours," Minho explained. "They call themselves humans. They've reached out to the Kelmar Union and the Prithvi Collective. Some council members think we should establish formal contact." "That's good," Krelvan said. "New species bring new ideas, new ways of seeing the universe." Minho nodded but looked uncertain. Elder Day seemed worried in the morning briefing. He said something about their expansion rate being unusual. "Elder Day worries about everything," Krelvan said with a gentle smile. "He still remembers the old stories from before the Great Peace. He sees danger in shadows." The Great Peace had lasted for 3,000 cycles. The Sharevan had abandoned warfare after nearly destroying themselves in ancient conflicts. Those days were so far in the past that they seemed like myths now. War was something that happened in history texts, not in real life. At midday, Krelvan ate lunch with several colleagues in the Institute's garden. They sat beside a fountain, discussing philosophy and science. The conversation turned to the humans again. "I heard they use primitive chemical rockets for space travel," one researcher said. "Can you imagine? So inefficient." "Perhaps they're just young as a civilization," another suggested. "We all start somewhere." "I think we should welcome them," Minho said. "Share our knowledge. Help them advance more quickly." Elder Day joined them, his old body moving slowly. He had lived for nearly 200 cycles, far longer than most Sharevan. His eyes were clouded with age, but his mind remained sharp. "You speak of the humans," Elder Day said, sitting carefully on a bench. You speak with the confidence of those who have never known war. Respectfully, Elder, Krelvin said, war is in the past. No civilized species fights anymore. The galaxy has moved beyond such primitive behavior. Elder Day was quiet for a moment. I have studied the old texts more than anyone else alive. I remember what our ancestors wrote about the nature of conflict. They warned us to never forget that peace is a choice, not a natural state. It must be maintained. But the humans haven't threatened anyone, Minho pointed out. They've been peaceful in their contacts. Perhaps, Elder Day said. But watch them carefully. I have reviewed their transmissions. There is something in their behavior that troubles me. They expand too quickly. They build too many ships. They ask too many questions about military capabilities. You see threats where there are none, another researcher said gently. This is the problem with studying ancient history. It makes you paranoid. Elder Day smiled sadly. I hope you are right. I truly do. That evening, Krelvan returned home as the twin moons began to rise. Hana had prepared the evening meal, and they ate together as a family. The children told stories about their day at Learning Center. His daughter had started a new project about ancient Sherevan architecture. His son had learned a new swimming technique. After the children went to sleep, Krelvan and Hana sat on their dwelling's observation deck. The city lights sparkled below them like stars reflected in water. Above, the actual stars shone bright and clear. Minho told me about the humans today, Hana said quietly. Elder Day is worried. Elder Day always worries, Krelvan said, putting his arm around her shoulders. He's old. He remembers stories that happened so long ago they might as well be fiction. Do you think they're dangerous? Krelvan looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, humans were traveling between worlds, meeting new species, building their civilization. I think they're probably just like us, trying to understand the universe, trying to live peaceful lives, looking up at the stars and wondering what's out there. Hana leaned against him. I hope you're right. I am, Krelvan said with confidence. The galaxy is too big for conflict anymore. We're all too connected, too dependent on each other. War is a thing of the past. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the moons cross the sky. Krelvan felt completely safe, completely content. His family was healthy. His work was meaningful. His world was at peace. He had no way of knowing that in 3 days, everything he loved would be gone. He had no way of knowing that human warships were already moving toward Veltara, their weapons armed, their orders clear. He had no way of knowing that Elder Day's fears were not paranoia, but prophecy. For now, Krelvan simply held his mate close and watched the stars, believing in a future that would never come. The alarms started at dawn. Krelvan woke to a sound he had never heard before, a piercing wail that made his blood feel cold. Hana sat up beside him, her eyes wide with confusion. What is that? She asked. Krelvan didn't know. The city had warning systems for natural disasters, storms, and earthquakes, but this sound was different. This sound felt like it came from some ancient part of his mind, some instinct buried deep that recognized danger even when the conscious mind did not. He got out of bed and moved to the window. The sky was wrong. Streaks of light were falling from above, but they weren't meteors. They moved with purpose, changing direction as they fell, and above them, visible even in the early morning light, were shapes that didn't belong. Massive shapes hanging in the sky like dark clouds. Get the children, Krelvan said, his voice tight. Get them now! Hana ran to the children's room. Krelvan activated the communication console, but the screen showed only static. He tried again. Nothing. The entire network was down. The first explosion came from the eastern part of the city. The sound was so loud that the windows shook. Krelvan grabbed the edge of the console to steady himself. Another explosion followed, then another. The sky filled with fire. Hana returned with both children. They were crying, frightened by the noise. Krelvan held them close, trying to think. Where could they go? What was happening? "We need to get to a shelter," Hana said. "The emergency bunker's near the Institute." Krelvan nodded. It was the only plan that made sense. They gathered what they could in seconds: water containers, emergency supplies, identification crystals. Then they ran. The streets were chaos. Sharavan were running in every direction, some toward shelters, others simply away from the explosions. Transport pods had stopped working. The power grid was failing. More of those burning streaks fell from the sky, and wherever they landed, buildings collapsed. Krelvan pulled his family through the crowd. His daughter held tight to his hand. His son clung to Hana's back. They pushed forward, but the crowd was too thick, too panicked. Everyone was trying to reach the same places, the same shelters. Then Krelvan saw them, the humans. They came from the burning streaks, from metal pods that had crashed into the city. Figures in heavy armor carrying weapons that looked nothing like the ceremonial arms in Sharavan museums. These were tools made for killing, and the humans used them with terrible efficiency. A group of Sharavan civilians ran past the humans, trying to escape. The humans didn't hesitate. They raised their weapons and fired. The sound was sharp and quick. The Sharavan fell and didn't move again. Krelvan stopped moving. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. This wasn't possible. Civilized species didn't do this. War was ancient history. This couldn't be real. "Krelvan!" Hana screamed. She pulled at his arm. "We have to go!" He shook himself and started moving again. They turned down a side street, away from the main roads, away from the humans. But the explosions were everywhere now. The city was being destroyed systematically, section by section. They reached the Institute 20 minutes later, though it felt like hours. The building was damaged but still standing. Krelvan led his family through the entrance. Inside, other survivors huddled in the corridors. Some were injured. All were terrified. "Krelvan!" Minho called out from further down the hall. He was bleeding from a cut on his head, but he was alive. "Thank the currents you made it. We need to get to the lower levels. The humans are sweeping through every building." "The humans did this?" Krelvan asked, though he already knew the answer. "Why? We never threatened them. We never even made contact." "I don't know," Minho said. "But Elder Day was right. We should have listened." They moved down into the basement levels of the Institute, where the research laboratories were built deep into the ground. Hana settled the children in a corner with some other families. The children were quiet now, too frightened to cry. Krelvan stood with Minho near the sealed door, listening to the sounds from above: explosions, weapons fire, screaming, the sounds of a world ending. "I need to go back," Krelvan said suddenly. "I left data at our dwelling, research notes, everything." "Are you insane?" Minho grabbed his arm. "You can't go back out there." "I have to," Krelvan said. He knew it was foolish, but something in him refused to accept this reality. If he could just get back home, maybe this would all make sense. Maybe he could salvage something from this nightmare. He turned to Hana. "Stay here with the children. Keep them safe. I'll be back before dark." "Krelvan, no," Hana said, fear clear in her voice. "Don't go. Please." "I have to," he said. He pressed his forehead to hers one last time. "I love you. I'll come back." He left before she could stop him. He left before he could change his mind. It was the worst decision of his life, but he didn't know that yet. The journey back took twice as long. Krelvan had to hide constantly, ducking into buildings and alleys whenever he heard the sound of human patrols. He saw more bodies. Sharavan, who hadn't made it to shelter. Sharavan, who had been shot while running. Sharavan, who had been crushed by falling buildings. He saw human soldiers up close for the first time. They were smaller than Sharavan, but they moved with a speed and precision that was frightening. They communicated through devices on their armor, coordinating their movements. They swept through each building methodically, clearing every room. Krelvan realized with growing horror that this wasn't just an attack. This was an extermination. The humans weren't here to conquer. They were here to erase the Shreven completely. When he finally reached his dwelling, his heart stopped. The entire residential section had been hit by orbital bombardment. The buildings were collapsed, crushed by impacts from space. The structure where his family lived was now just rubble and twisted metal. "No," Krelvan whispered. He started running. No, no, no. He reached what had been his home. Nothing remained standing. Everything was destroyed. He started digging through the debris with his bare hands, pulling away chunks of wall and broken furniture. He called out, even though he knew no one was there. "Hana! Children! Can you hear me?" Only silence answered. He dug faster, his hands bleeding now, his breath coming in gasps. He had to find something, anything. His fingers touched something smooth. He pulled it free from the rubble. It was Hana's identification crystal, the one she wore always, the one that carried her family history, her memories, her essence. It was cracked. The light inside was gone. Krelvan clutched the crystal to his chest and made a sound he had never made before. A sound of pure anguish, torn from somewhere deep inside him. He fell to his knees in the rubble of his home and wept. He had left them. He had left Hana and the children at the Institute, thinking he could come back to his dwelling for research notes, for data, for meaningless things. And while he was gone, this section of the city had been destroyed. They were still at the Institute. They had to be. This wasn't his home anymore. This was just rubble. They were safe. They had to be safe. He stood up, his legs shaking. He had to get back. He had to find them. But then he heard the sound of boots on rubble behind him. He turned slowly. 3 human soldiers stood there, their weapons pointed at him. They spoke in their language, harsh sounds he didn't understand. One of them gestured with his weapon, clearly ordering Krelvan to move. Krelvan looked at them. These creatures had destroyed his world. They had killed his people. And now they stood before him, alive and armored while everything he loved was gone. He should have felt rage. He should have felt hatred. But all he felt was empty. One of the soldiers stepped forward, impatient. Krelvan turned and ran. He heard shouts behind him, then the crack of weapons fire. Something hot burned across his shoulder, but he kept running. He ran down into the underground water channels, into the dark tunnels beneath the city. He ran until he couldn't hear them anymore. He ran until his legs gave out. Then he collapsed against the tunnel wall, alone in the darkness, clutching Hana's broken crystal. Above him, the city continued to burn. And Krelvan's world, the world of peace and safety and family, died forever. 3 weeks had passed since the attack. Krelvan wasn't sure how he knew that, since time in the underground tunnels felt meaningless. But others in the group kept track, marking each day on the tunnel walls with pieces of broken rock. 21 marks. 21 days since the world ended. He sat in a small cave chamber with 14 other Shreven. They were all that remained of his city, as far as anyone knew. Maybe there were more survivors hiding elsewhere. Maybe not. Communications were still down. The humans controlled everything above ground. The group had organized itself out of necessity. Everyone had a role. Kyung was the leader, a former civil engineer who understood the tunnel systems better than anyone. Yuna was their military expert, though her expertise came only from studying ancient history. Taiho was an engineer who could fix almost anything with spare parts. There were others too, each with their own skills, their own stories of loss. Krelvan's role was unclear. He had skills in exotic matter research, which was useless now. Mostly, he just sat and stared at Hana's broken crystal. He hadn't spoken much since joining the group. "We need to make a supply run," Kyung announced to the group. "Food stores are running low. The emergency rations won't last another week." "The humans patrol every building now," someone said. "It's too dangerous." "We don't have a choice," Kyung replied. "We either risk it or we starve." Yuna stepped forward. She was older than Krelvan, her skin showing the marks of many cycles, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "I'll go. I know how to move without being seen. The old texts described urban warfare tactics. I've been studying them since the attack." "You'll need help," Tai-Ho said. "I'll come with you. We also need electronic components if we can find any. I'm close to getting a communications device working." "If we can communicate, we might find other survivor groups," Kyung said hopefully. "We can't be the only ones left." Krelvan listened to them plan. Part of him wanted to help, but another part, the part that held Hana's crystal, didn't care about anything anymore. What was the point? Even if they survived, even if they found other Sherevan, their civilization was destroyed. The humans had won. The supply team left before dawn, when the human patrols were changing shifts. Yuna had observed their patterns carefully over the past weeks. They returned 6 hours later with bags of dried food and, more importantly, several pieces of electronic equipment salvaged from a destroyed military archive. "The archive was mostly intact," Tai-Ho said excitedly. "The humans haven't reached that sector yet. There are still functioning computers there." "Did you access any data?" Kyung asked. "Some," Yuna said quietly. Her face was troubled. There were military reports from other systems. Reports that came in before the communications network went down. Everyone gathered around her. "What did they say?" someone asked. Yuna's voice was heavy. "The humans attacked 3 other species in the past 10 cycles. The same pattern every time. No warning, no declaration, just overwhelming force." The group fell silent. Krelvan felt something stir inside him, something beyond the numbness. "Why?" he asked. It was the first word he'd spoken in days. Yuna looked at him. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." Over the next week, Tai-Ho worked frantically on the communications equipment. He combined parts from different systems, creating something new from the salvaged pieces. Krelvan found himself drawn to help. It gave him something to do besides think. "This receiver is damaged," Tai-Ho said, examining a circuit board. "Can you check if there's a redundant pathway we can use?" Krelvan took the board and studied it. His research background helped him understand the flow of energy through the circuits. "Here," he said, pointing to a section. "If we bypass this node and reroute through this pathway, it should work." Tai-Ho smiled. "Good. You're useful after all." It took 3 more days, but finally Tai-Ho activated the device. Static filled the air, then slowly resolved into broken transmissions. Most were human communications, encrypted and impossible to understand. But occasionally, they caught fragments of Sherevan broadcasts from other worlds. Requesting assistance. Humans in Sector 7. Civilian casualties estimated at... No response from the Council. We are alone. The broadcasts painted a clear picture. The humans hadn't just attacked Veltara. They had attacked multiple Sherevan colonies simultaneously. It was a coordinated assault across several systems. The Sherevan civilization, which had existed for thousands of cycles, had been nearly destroyed in a single day. "I need to go back to the archive," Yuna said. "There has to be information about why they did this." "It's too dangerous," Kyung protested. "The humans are expanding their patrols." "I have to know," Yuna insisted. "We can't fight back if we don't understand our enemy." Krelvan surprised himself by speaking up. "I'll go with you." Everyone looked at him. He had barely left the cave chamber in weeks. "Are you sure?" Kyung asked. Krelvan looked down at the crystal in his hand. Hana would want him to do something. She wouldn't want him to just sit in the dark waiting to die. I'm sure. They left that night. Yuna moved through the tunnels with confidence, always listening, always alert. Krelvan followed, his body weak from weeks of inactivity. They emerged from the tunnels far from the archive, then traveled above ground in short bursts, hiding whenever they heard human patrols. The city was unrecognizable. Buildings that had stood for centuries were now rubble. Streets were empty except for human soldiers and their vehicles. The occupiers had set up checkpoints at every major intersection. The few Sharevan Krelvan saw were being herded into designated areas, their movements controlled and restricted. They're organizing us, Yuna whispered. Like livestock. They reached the archive just before dawn. The building was damaged but still standing. Yuna led him to a basement level where old military computers were stored. These systems predated modern networks, which was why they still functioned. Taiho had given them a data crystal that could interface with the old systems. Yuna inserted it and began searching through files. Krelvan stood watch by the door, listening for any sounds of human presence. I found something, Yuna said after an hour. Historical data about humanity, reports from other species who encountered them. Krelvan moved to look over her shoulder. The screen showed text in the common galactic language. He read quickly. Humanity had encountered a hostile species called the Vrex approximately 50 cycles ago. The Vrex had attacked Earth without warning, nearly destroying humanity's home world. Only through desperate fighting and massive casualties had humans survived. After the Vrex War, humanity changed. They became obsessed with survival at any cost. They built massive fleets. They studied warfare constantly, and they developed a doctrine. Never let another species grow strong enough to threaten them. Strike first. Survive forever. They're afraid, Krelvan said softly. This is all because they're afraid. Keep reading, Yuna said. The next section explained the trigger. Human intelligence had detected that the Sharevan were conducting advanced biotechnology research. Research into genetic modification, disease treatment, cellular manipulation. The humans interpreted this as biological warfare capability. They decided the Sharevan were a potential threat that needed to be eliminated before that potential became reality. We were destroyed because of what we might do? Krelvan felt rage building inside him. Not for anything we did, but for what we might do. They were traumatized by the Vrex, Yuna said, so they became the thing they feared. They became the species that attacks without warning. Krelvan stood up and paced the small room. His hands were shaking. My mate is dead because they were afraid. My children are dead because we had the capability to create medicine. Do you understand how insane that is? I understand, Yuna said quietly. But understanding them doesn't change what we have to do. What do we have to do? Krelvan asked. Yuna looked at him directly. We have to fight. We have to show them that they were wrong about us, or we have to prove them right. Either way, we can't just hide in tunnels until we die. Krelvan thought about that. The Sharevan had abandoned warfare 3,000 cycles ago. Their last wars had nearly destroyed their species. The Great Peace had been built on a promise. Never again would they take up arms. But the humans had left them no choice. Peace only worked when both sides chose it. I don't know how to fight, Krelvan said. Neither do I, Yuna admitted. But I know how to learn. And I know that sometimes survival requires us to become something we're not. They gathered all the data they could carry and prepared to leave. But as they reached the exit, they heard voices outside. Human voices. A patrol was approaching. Yuna grabbed Krelvan's arm and pulled him back into the shadows. They watched through a crack in the door as 6 human soldiers entered the building. The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, checking each room systematically. Krelvan's heart pounded. If they were found, they would die here. But something else stirred in him, too. He looked at these humans, these creatures who had destroyed everything he loved because they might someday be threatened. And for the first time since Hana died, Krelvan felt something other than grief. He felt hatred, pure and simple and focused. These humans had taken his family, they had taken his world, they had taken his future. Maybe he could take something from them in return. The humans passed within 3 meters of where Krelvan and Yuna hid. They could hear the soldiers talking in their harsh language, could see the weapons hanging from their armor. But the patrol moved on without finding them. After they left, Krelvan and Yuna waited another hour before slipping out and returning to the tunnels. The information they brought back changed everything. Kyung gathered the entire group to hear what they had learned. When Yuna finished explaining about the Vrex War and humanity's doctrine of preemptive strikes, the cave fell silent. "So we were destroyed for nothing," someone said bitterly. "We never threatened them. We never even spoke to them. They saw our research and decided we might become dangerous someday," Yuna said. "So they eliminated the possibility." "What do we do now?" another survivor asked. "We're 14 people hiding in tunnels. They have armies, warships, technology we can't match." "We fight anyway," Krelvan said. Everyone looked at him in surprise. He had been silent for so long that his voice seemed strange. "We may not win. We probably won't win. But we make them pay for what they did." "How?" Taiho asked. "We don't have weapons. We don't have training. We're scientists and teachers and engineers." "Then we learn," Krelvan said. "Yuna studied ancient warfare. We have the archives. We have knowledge. And we have something the humans don't expect." "What's that?" Kyung asked. "Desperation," Krelvan answered. "They took everything from us. We have nothing left to lose." Over the next month, the group transformed. Yuna became their military instructor, teaching them everything she had learned from ancient texts. The Sherevan had once been warriors thousands of cycles ago. That knowledge still existed in archives and histories. They just had to remember it. Taiho worked on creating weapons from salvaged materials. The Sherevan had powerful industrial tools, mining equipment designed to cut through rock and metal. In the right hands, those tools became weapons. Krelvan coordinated intelligence gathering. Using the communication device, they monitored human broadcasts and patrol patterns. They mapped the occupation forces, identifying supply routes and weak points. His research mind proved useful for analyzing patterns and finding vulnerabilities. They recruited more survivors who emerged from hiding. The group grew to 30, then 50. Most were like Krelvan, ordinary people who had lost everything and wanted revenge. Some were young, barely adults. Others were old. Their bodies weak, but their resolve strong. Among the new arrivals was a young female named Somin. She couldn't have been more than 16 cycles old. She had survived alone for 5 weeks, hiding in the ruins of her learning center. When she first arrived, she wouldn't speak to anyone. She just sat in the corner and stared at nothing. Krelvan saw himself in her. The same emptiness, the same grief. He started sitting with her during meal times, not talking, just being present. Slowly, over days, she began to respond. "My parents worked at the spaceport," she finally said one evening. "They were there when the humans hit it with orbital strikes. They died instantly at least. They didn't suffer. My mate and children were at the institute when our residential sector was destroyed," Krelvan said quietly. "I wasn't with them. I left to get some research notes from home." "Do you blame yourself?" Somin asked. "Every day," Krelvan admitted, "but blaming myself doesn't bring them back, so instead, I'm going to fight the ones who took them from me." Somin was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to fight too." "You're young," Krelvan said. "You should stay here where it's safer." "Nowhere is safe," Somin said. "Not anymore. And I'm not helpless." I was training to be an engineer before all this. I can help." Krelvan looked at her and saw determination in her eyes. She reminded him of his daughter, who had wanted to be a historian. His daughter would have been brave like this too. "All right," he said. "But you stay close to me during operations. Understand?" She nodded. From that day forward, she followed him everywhere, learning everything he did. She became something between a student and a daughter to him. It didn't replace what he had lost, but it gave him a reason to survive beyond revenge. Their first operation came 6 weeks after the attack. A human supply convoy traveled the same route every 3 days, bringing food and equipment to the occupation forces. Krelvan's analysis had identified a point where the convoy passed through a narrow canyon, a perfect place for an ambush. 12 of them went, including Krelvan, Yuna, and Taiho. They hid on the canyon walls with modified mining charges. The plan was simple: wait for the convoy, trigger the explosives, then retreat through prepared escape routes. Krelvan's hands shook as he waited. He had never hurt anyone in his life. The Sharavan were peaceful. But when he thought of Hana's broken crystal, his hands steadied. The convoy appeared on schedule, 3 vehicles with armed escorts. Yuna gave the signal. Taiho triggered the charges. The explosion was massive. Rock and debris rained down on the convoy. 2 vehicles were destroyed immediately. The third tried to reverse but got stuck in the rubble. Human soldiers poured out, taking defensive positions and returning fire, even though they couldn't see their attackers. "Now!" Yuna shouted. The Sharavan resistance fighters opened fire with their makeshift weapons. Modified industrial lasers cut through human armor. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, all the humans were dead. Krelvan stared at the bodies. He had helped kill them. He had planned this attack. These humans were dead because of decisions he had made. He thought he would feel guilty. Instead, he felt nothing, just emptiness and a grim satisfaction that they had struck back. "Grab what we can and go," Yuna ordered. "More patrols will come soon." They salvaged weapons, food, and equipment before disappearing back into the tunnels. That night, the group celebrated their first victory. But Krelvan couldn't join in. He sat alone with Somin, both of them quiet. "Does it get easier?" Somin asked. "The killing?" "I don't know," Krelvan said honestly. "Maybe it shouldn't." The humans responded to the attack with brutal efficiency. They executed 20 Sharavan civilians in the city center, claiming they were collaborating with resistance fighters. They increased patrols and checkpoints. They began systematically destroying any building that could hide survivors. The resistance struck back harder. They sabotaged power stations. They ambushed patrols. They destroyed supply depots. Each attack was carefully planned, using Krelvan's analysis to maximize damage while minimizing risk. But each attack also brought reprisals. More civilians died. The occupation forces became more violent, more suspicious. The Sharavan caught in the middle suffered most of all. "We're making it worse for them," one resistance member said during a planning meeting. "Every time we attack, the humans kill more civilians." "They're killing civilians anyway," Yuna countered. "At least this way, we're fighting back." The debate grew heated. Some wanted to stop the attacks, to try negotiating with the humans. Others wanted to escalate, to use the full range of Sharavan technology as weapons. Krelvan listened to both sides, torn. Finally, Kyung asked him directly, "What do you think, Krelvan? Your analysis drives all our operations. What should we do?" Krelvan thought about Hana, who had always believed in mercy. He thought about his children, who would never grow up now. He thought about Somin, sitting across from him, waiting to hear what he would say. "We continue," he said finally, "but carefully. We don't stop fighting, but we don't become monsters either. We stay focused on military targets. We avoid anything that deliberately harms civilians. The humans may have started this as exterminators, but we won't give them justification after the fact. That limits our options, Taiho pointed out. Good, Krelvan said. If we're going to lose our civilization, let's at least not lose our souls in the process. 3 months after the invasion, Taiho made a breakthrough with the communications system. He managed to establish contact with resistance cells on 2 other occupied Sharevan worlds. The news was grim. The pattern was the same everywhere. Overwhelming initial attacks, brutal occupations, scattered resistance groups fighting against impossible odds. But knowing they weren't alone changed something. The resistance groups began sharing information, coordinating attacks, supporting each other. The fight wasn't hopeless. It was desperate, but not hopeless. During one supply raid, Krelvan's team captured a human data device. When Taiho cracked the encryption, they found files about human psychology, training materials for occupation forces, and strategic assessments. Krelvan read through the files late into the night. What he found disturbed him more than anything else. The humans were acting out of trauma. The Vrex attack had created a species-wide psychological wound. Every human grew up learning about the attack, learning to fear that it could happen again. Their entire civilization was shaped by that one traumatic event. They attacked others not out of cruelty, but out of terror. They killed preemptively because they couldn't bear to be victims again. In a twisted way, every human soldier who pulled the trigger on a Sharevan civilian was reacting to the memory of Vrex weapons pulling triggers on human civilians decades ago. Does it matter? Soman asked when he shared this. Does it matter if they're afraid when the result is the same? Krelvan didn't have an answer. 5 months into the occupation, Taiho called an emergency meeting. His face was pale, and his hands shook as he held up a data crystal. I found something in the old research archives, he said. Something from before the invasion. The Institute was working on a theoretical project. Genetic targeting technology. Everyone gathered around as he explained. The Sharevans' advanced biotechnology had been focused on medicine and healing. But the same technology that could cure genetic diseases could also be weaponized. The research showed it was theoretically possible to create a pathogen that would target specific DNA sequences. You're talking about a biological weapon, Kyung said slowly. One that would only affect humans. Yes, Taiho confirmed. The research was abandoned because our ethics councils deemed it too dangerous. But the groundwork was done. With our current knowledge and resources, I could complete it within 2 months. The chamber fell completely silent. Everyone understood what this meant. They could create a weapon that would cleanse Veltara of every human, leaving Sharevan unharmed. A perfect solution to the occupation. We should do it, someone said. They're exterminating us slowly. This would let us fight back effectively. It would make us exactly what they feared, another argued. Proof that they were right to attack us. The debate raged for hours. Yuna pointed out the tactical advantages. Others raised ethical concerns. The group split almost evenly. Finally, they looked to Krelvan. You've led our strategy from the beginning, Kyung said. What do you say? Krelvan sat quietly, turning Hana's crystal over in his hands. The crystal that had once held her memories, her essence, everything that made her who she was. Now it was just a broken piece of material. Give me time to think, he said. This decision is too important to make quickly. He walked through the tunnels alone, eventually finding a quiet chamber where water dripped from the ceiling into a small pool. He sat beside the pool and stared at his reflection in the water. If they used the bioweapon, they would win. The humans would die, and Veltara would belong to the Sharevan again. It would be justice for what the humans had done. It would be revenge for Hana, for his children, for everyone they had lost. But Hana had always believed in mercy. Even when she disagreed with someone, even when they wronged her, She looked for ways to understand and forgive. Would she want him to use a weapon that would kill an entire species? He thought about the files he had read. The humans were afraid. They were acting out of trauma. That didn't excuse what they did, but it explained it. If he used the bioweapon, he would be proving that their fears were justified. He would be showing the galaxy that yes, the Sharavan were capable of creating and using weapons of mass destruction. And what would Somin learn from that choice? What kind of future would they be creating for the survivors? He returned to the group the next day. I need to do something before I decide, he told them. I need to see the humans up close again, really see them. That's dangerous, Yuna said. Everything is dangerous now, Krelvan replied. He took Somin with him. They moved through the tunnels to an area near one of the human checkpoints. There, hidden in the shadows, they watched the occupation forces go about their daily routines. The humans looked tired. They sat in small groups during breaks, showing each other images on their data devices, pictures of families back on Earth, home worlds they hadn't seen in months. They laughed sometimes, telling stories. They looked worried sometimes, scanning the ruins nervously. One soldier, who looked barely older than Somin, sat alone polishing his weapon. His hands moved automatically, but his eyes were distant. Haunted. Krelvan recognized that expression. It was the same one he saw in the mirror. They're people, Somin whispered. I knew that logically, but seeing them like this... They're just people who are afraid. Does that change anything? Krelvan asked. I don't know, Somin admitted. They still killed my parents. They're still occupying our world. But yes, it changes something. I can't explain what, but it does. A supply transport arrived at the checkpoint. The soldiers unloaded boxes of rations and equipment. As they worked, one of them made a joke and the others laughed. Normal people doing normal work, except that work was maintaining an occupation built on genocide. Then Krelvan heard something that made his blood freeze. Two soldiers stood near their hiding spot, close enough that their voices carried clearly. One was speaking in the human language, but Krelvan had learned enough words over the months to understand parts of it. I hate this posting, one soldier said. These aren't warriors. We're not fighting an army. We're just clearing out civilians. Better them than us, the other responded. Remember Earth. Remember the wrecks. This is what survival costs. I know the doctrine, the first soldier said. Strike first, survive forever. But these people had children, families. We killed them all. How is that different from what the wrecks did to us? It's different because we're still alive, the second soldier said firmly. That's the only difference that matters. I have a daughter back on Earth. I want her to grow up safe. If that means these aliens had to die, then that's what it means. The two soldiers moved away. Krelvan and Somin retreated into the tunnels. Did you hear what they said? Somin asked. They compared us to what the wrecks did to them. They know it's wrong, but they do it anyway. Krelvan nodded slowly. They're trapped in their trauma. They're so afraid of being victims again that they became the aggressors. And they tell themselves it's necessary, that it's survival, so they can live with what they've done. When they returned to the group, everyone was waiting for Krelvan's decision. He stood before them, feeling the weight of every eye on him. I've decided, he said. We don't build the bioweapon. Protests erupted immediately. They're killing us, someone shouted. This is our chance to fight back. Krelvan raised his hand for silence. Listen to me. If we use that weapon, we prove the humans were right about us. We become exactly what they feared. We show the galaxy that yes, the Sharavan are a biological threat. Every other species will look at what we did and think, maybe humanity was justified after all. So we just accept defeat? Taiho asked, hurt in his voice. No, Krelvan said. We do something the humans won't expect. We tell the truth. We broadcast what happened here to every species in the galaxy. We show them what humanity's fear-based doctrine really means. We make the humans answer for their actions. How does that help us? Someone demanded. Maybe it doesn't help us, Krelvan admitted, but it helps the next species, and the one after that. Humanity is strong because they're united by fear. We break that by making them stand alone. We turn their fear against them by making them the isolated ones, the ones other species are afraid of. Yuna studied him carefully. This is revenge of a different kind. Not violence, but exposure. You want to make them pay by showing everyone what they really are. Yes, Krelvan said. And more than that, I want to prove we're not what they said we were. We had the capability to create a bioweapon. We could have used it, but we chose not to. That choice matters. The group debated for 3 more days. In the end, they voted. It was close, but Krelvan's position won. They would not build the weapon. Instead, they would find a way to broadcast their story to the galaxy. Over the next 2 months, they worked on a different kind of project. Taiho modified their communication system to access long-range transmission networks. Yuna helped compile evidence, video recordings of the attack, survivor testimonies, analysis of human strategy. Krelvan wrote the message that would accompany it all. The message didn't ask for rescue. The Sharavan were already nearly extinct, but it asked other species to see what humanity had become, to understand that humanity's doctrine of preemptive strikes made them a threat to everyone, to choose whether they would stand against that or become the next victims. 3 days before they planned to send the broadcast, disaster struck. A human patrol captured Soman during a supply run. The resistance got word quickly. The humans were interrogating her, trying to find the location of the resistance base. Krelvan didn't hesitate. We go get her. Now. It's a trap, Yuna warned. They probably let us find out on purpose. They want us to come. I don't care, Krelvan said. I'm not leaving her. He took 8 fighters, including Yuna, on the rescue mission. They hit the human detention facility just after dark, using every tactic they had learned over the months. Modified mining charges blew holes in the walls. Precision strikes took out guard posts. They fought their way to the detention cells, and Krelvan personally tore open Soman's cell door. She was beaten but alive. Krelvan, she gasped. They know about the broadcast. They're jamming all long-range transmissions. Of course they were. The humans weren't stupid. They had probably intercepted pieces of the Resistance's communications and figured out the plan. They fought their way out, but Krelvan took a plasma burn to his side. The pain was incredible, but he kept moving. They made it back to the tunnels, but human forces were pursuing now. They knew the general area. We have to evacuate, Kyung said. They'll find this base within days. Then we send the broadcast now, Krelvan said through gritted teeth. We don't have time to wait. The jamming, Taiho started. Work around it, Krelvan interrupted. You're brilliant. Find a way. Taiho worked for 18 hours straight while the Resistance packed and prepared to move. Finally, he found a solution. They couldn't use long-range communications directly, but they could piggyback on the humans' own satellite network, using it to relay the message before the humans could shut it down. It would only work once. They would have one chance. The entire Resistance gathered as Taiho prepared to send the broadcast. Krelvan sat against the wall, his wound bandaged but still bleeding. Soman held his hand. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. Krelvan looked at her. She had survived so much, lost so much, just like him. Your parents, he said. What would they want? Revenge or justice? Justice, Somin said without hesitation. Then we choose justice, Krelvan said. He looked down at Hana's crystal. And we choose to be better than our fear. Taiho activated the transmission. The data flooded out through the humans' own networks, racing toward relay stations that would send it across the galaxy. Video of the attack on Veltara. Testimony from survivors. analysis of humanity's pattern of preemptive strikes, and Krelvan's message explaining what the Shiravan had chosen not to do with their biotechnology. They proved they had the capability for biological warfare by showing the research, and they proved they weren't a threat by explaining why they chose not to complete it. Within minutes, alarms sounded throughout the human military network. They tried to shut down the transmission, but by then it was too late. The message was bouncing across relays, spreading to every communication hub in the sector. Within hours, it would reach dozens of species. Within days, hundreds. 5 years passed. Krelvan stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The water was polluted now, the ecosystem damaged by years of war and occupation. But it was still beautiful in its own way. Life persisted even in ruin. The humans still occupied Veltara. The Shiravan civilization had been reduced to scattered survivors on a dozen worlds. But the broadcast had changed something fundamental in the galaxy. Other species had seen what humanity did. Some dismissed it, some justified it, but many were disturbed. A coalition had formed, demanding humanity answer for their actions. Economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, pressure from multiple directions. It hadn't saved the Shiravan, but it might save the next species. And maybe that was enough. Somin stood beside him, grown now, no longer the frightened teenager he had first met. She had become a leader in the resistance, carrying forward the fight in ways Krelvan no longer could. His wound had never fully healed, and he moved slowly now. Elder Yuna wants to try a raid on the northern supply depot, Somin said. I told her we need better intelligence first. Krelvan smiled. Yuna had earned the title of Elder through her leadership and wisdom. The old words meant something new now. You're learning. I had a good teacher, Somin said. Krelvan pulled out Hana's crystal. The light inside was still gone, but he had carried it every day for 5 years. I lost everything, he said quietly. My mate, my children, my world, my people. The humans took it all. He paused, then continued. But they couldn't take this. They couldn't take my choice of who to be in response to what they did. They made me into a fighter, but I chose not to become a monster. That choice is mine, not theirs. Somin put her hand on his shoulder. Below them, in the tunnels and caves, a new generation of Shiravan were learning to survive, learning to resist, learning that peace was beautiful, but that protecting peace sometimes required strength. The humans had been terrifyingly right about one thing. The Shiravan could be dangerous if they chose to be. They had the knowledge, the capability, the motivation. But danger and monstrosity were different things. Capability and choice were different things. Krelvan looked at the damaged world before him and knew he would probably die here, fighting an occupation he would never see end. But future generations would remember that, when the Shiravan had the chance to become what their enemies feared, they chose to remain who they were. And somehow, in that choice, in that refusal to let hatred consume them completely, they kept alive the memory of everything worth fighting for. The human soldier's words echoed in his memory. Better them than us. But Krelvan had learned a different truth. Better to lose everything than to lose yourself. Better to die as who you are than to survive as who you're not. He held the crystal up to the light and whispered, I kept my promise, Hana. I came back. It just took longer than I thought. And in the reflection of the crystal, for just a moment, he could almost see her smile.